Hello, America. JOC here with your Ranting Politics headline updates, where we are diving into today's most explosive political stories that you need to know about. Coming up, China is firing warning shots in the escalating trade war, threatening countries that make deals with the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the president himself is sitting down with retail giants like Walmart and Target to address their tariff concerns. In the Middle East, Israel is reportedly considering limited strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, even as Trump pushes for diplomacy. And we've got some fascinating polling data showing Gen Z voters might be breaking Republican in unprecedented numbers. If you're just tuning in for the first time, welcome to America's fastest-growing daily news rundown, designed specifically for your commute, run, or coffee time. Stick around for all this and more in your daily dose of unfiltered news and common-sense commentary. This is Ranting Politics Headline Updates. China is not playing nice in the global sandbox, folks. According to the New York Post, Beijing is now openly threatening any country that dares to cut deals with the United States to avoid Trump's tariffs. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce issued what amounts to a geopolitical mess-around and find-out statement on Monday, vowing to resolutely take countermeasures against nations that strike economic agreements with the U.S. at China's expense. In typical diplomatic speak that thinly veils the threat beneath, the Chinese government declared, "Appeasement cannot bring peace, and compromise cannot win respect." They even threw in a colorful metaphor, saying countries seeking tariff exemptions from the U.S. are essentially seeking the skin from a tiger and will ultimately only fail on both ends and harm others without benefiting themselves. This escalation comes after President Trump cranked up tariffs on Chinese imports to a whopping 145%, which prompted Beijing to slap retaliatory duties of 125% on American goods. The trade war is heating up faster than a wok in a Sichuan kitchen, and China isn't mincing words about it. What's particularly interesting here is China's accusation that the U.S. is using these tariffs as leverage to pressure other nations to reduce their trade with Beijing. The Chinese ministry statement claimed America has abused tariffs on all trading partners under the banner of so-called equivalence, while also forcing all parties to start so-called reciprocal tariffs negotiations. This puts smaller economies in a particularly tough spot, caught between the world's two largest economic powerhouses like a child watching mom and dad argue at the dinner table. Side with Trump for tariff relief and face China's wrath, or maintain business as usual with China and pay higher duties on U.S. exports. The message from Beijing couldn't be clearer. Countries thinking they can play both sides in this economic chess match should think again. China is determined to maintain its economic influence and isn't about to let the U.S. peel away its trading partners without consequences. As the trade war intensifies, the global economic ripple effects are becoming tsunami-sized waves. President Trump is pulling up a chair with some of the biggest names in retail to hash out concerns over his aggressive tariff policies. Fox Business reports that executives from Walmart, Home Depot, and Target are heading to the White House for a high-stakes conversation about how these trade measures are impacting their businesses and, by extension, American consumers. Walmart has confirmed their CEO, Doug McMillon, will be among the retail heavyweights in attendance, while Home Depot acknowledged they regularly meet with government officials on issues affecting their customers and business. This meeting comes at a critical moment in Trump's evolving trade strategy. Just weeks ago, the president dramatically escalated the economic standoff with China by jacking up tariffs on Chinese imports to an eye-watering 145%. That's the kind of number that makes retail executives break out in cold sweats, considering how much of their inventory comes from Chinese manufacturing. At the same time, Trump has extended something of an olive branch to other trading partners, announcing a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs and applying a reduced 10% duty during that period for countries that haven't retaliated against the United States. It's a classic carrot-and-stick approach that has countries around the world scrambling to reassess their trade relationships. The timing is particularly interesting given China's fresh warnings against nations that might be tempted to strike special deals with the U.S. According to Trump's recent Truth Social post, Many world leaders and business executives have come to me asking for relief from tariffs since he unveiled his baseline 10% levy on imported goods earlier this month. For retail giants whose business models depend heavily on global supply chains, these tariffs represent a massive disruption. The fundamental question these executives are likely bringing to the table is straightforward. Who ultimately pays for these tariffs? While the administration may frame them as penalties on foreign countries, the reality is that American retailers and consumers often shoulder much of the burden through higher prices. With inflation already a top concern for many Americans, this meeting could prove crucial in determining whether Trump's hardline stance on trade might see any modifications to accommodate domestic business interests, or if retailers will need to completely reimagine their supply chains in a new economic landscape. Israel appears to be charting its own course on Iran despite pushback from Washington. According to a report from Reuters, Israeli officials are now considering a limited strike on Iran's nuclear facilities in the coming months, a significant scale down from earlier proposals that would have required substantial American support. This shift in strategy comes after President Trump reportedly rejected Netanyahu's proposal for extensive strikes against Iran. Trump has made his preference for diplomacy crystal clear, telling reporters, "I'm not in a rush to do it because I think that Iran has a chance to have a great country and to live happily without death, and I'd like to see that. That's my first option." The timing is particularly sensitive, as American and Iranian officials held another round of nuclear talks in Rome just this past Saturday, with technical teams scheduled to reconvene this week to tackle thorny issues like uranium enrichment. Any Israeli military action now could derail these diplomatic efforts that seem to be gaining momentum. What's particularly noteworthy is how Israel has adapted its military options to require minimal U.S. backing. The plans reportedly include targeted actions ranging from airstrikes to commando raids designed to set back Iran's nuclear program by several months or more, with some options potentially timed for late spring or summer. Meanwhile, Tehran isn't sitting idle. Iranian state media reports that security officials claim to have credible intelligence suggesting Israel is planning an attack on its nuclear sites. Middle East analyst Trita Parsi told Newsweek that Israel shows intense determination to sabotage diplomacy, potentially through assassinations, sabotage, and other attacks designed to provoke Iran and undermine negotiations. This creates a precarious situation where Trump is pursuing a diplomatic track while one of America's closest allies appears to be considering unilateral action that could spark wider regional conflict. As Parsi put it, it is all the more important for the U.S. and Iran to progress rapidly and reach an agreement in short order. The Iranian side has its own red lines. Mohammad Sadr from Iran's Expediency Discernment Council warned, if Trump wants to bring Israel's demands to the negotiating table, including a complete halt to enrichment, naturally we will not reach an agreement. For now, Trump's position remains focused on diplomacy first, but with a clear warning. If there's a second option, I think it would be very bad for Iran, and I think Iran is wanting to talk. The question remains whether all parties will give negotiations a chance to succeed. Well, folks, here's something that should make both parties sit up and take notice. Young Americans might be leaning right these days. A fresh Yale youth poll has revealed a shocking political shift that nobody saw coming. Voters aged 18 to 21 now favor Republicans by a whopping 12 percentage points when asked about the upcoming 2026 congressional elections. This is a seismic shift in American politics. These youngest voters, the leading edge of Gen Z, have traditionally been reliable Democratic supporters, but the tides appear to be turning in a big way. Meanwhile, their slightly older counterparts, aged 22 to 29, still favor Democrats, but by a much slimmer margin of just 6.4 points. What's particularly striking is that this isn't an isolated finding. The Yale pollsters surveyed over 4,100 registered voters, with a robust oversample of over 2,000 young voters between ages 18 and 29. The margin of error was tiny, less than 2 percentage points, giving us a high level of confidence in these results. This conservative shift among the youngest voters helped propel President Trump back to the White House last November, and if it continues, we're looking at a potential partisan realignment that could fundamentally reshape American politics for years to come. The poll also found that Vice President JD Vance is emerging as the Republican Party's rising star among young conservatives. He enjoys a net favorability rating of plus 154 among Republican voters under 30, and a remarkable 53% of Republicans would back him in a hypothetical 2028 GOP primary. That's some serious political capital for a first-term VP. For Democrats, former Vice President Kamala Harris still maintains strong support, with 28% saying they'd vote for her in a 2028 Democratic primary. She maintains a solid plus 60 favorability rating among her base. But let's not forget, politics is always fluid. A recent CBS News YouGov poll shows Trump's economic approval rating underwater, with 56% disapproving of his economic policies versus 44% approving. This suggests Republicans haven't locked down the youth vote permanently. As University of Akron political science professor David Cohen pointed out, young voters compose a crucial part of the Democratic base, and if that is eroding, where do they make up for that? Going forward, Democrats will have to figure out how to bring young voters back to the fold. So what's really happening with young men shifting political alliances? Competitive nationally? I think we're witnessing something truly remarkable. The reorientation of American politics along new fault lines that have less to do with traditional left-right divides and more to do with populism versus establishment forces. Trump's economic policies, particularly his aggressive stance on tariffs, represent a fundamental break from the free trade orthodoxy that dominated both parties for decades. He's essentially running an economic nationalism experiment in real time, and a surprising number of young voters seem to be buying into it, at least for now. The rise of JD Vance perfectly encapsulates this realignment. Here's a guy who went from hillbilly elegy critic of Trump to his running mate and potential heir. Vance speaks directly to the economic anxieties of young Americans who've come of age in an era of stagnant wages, crushing student debt, and seemingly unattainable housing. His message resonates because it offers both explanation and enemy, globalization and the elites who championed it. For Democrats, this represents an existential challenge. Their coalition has long depended on overwhelming support from young voters to offset losses elsewhere. If Republicans can maintain even a competitive position with voters under 30, the math becomes nearly impossible for Democrats in national elections without significant gains among other demographics. What's particularly dangerous for Democrats is that young voters aren't just shifting on economics. They're increasingly aligned with Republicans on issues like immigration and crime as well. The progressive social positions that once brought young people into the Democratic fold are no longer enough to overcome these other concerns. Looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, both parties face critical strategic decisions. Republicans must determine whether to fully embrace economic populism or try to steer back toward traditional conservatism. Democrats need to decide if they'll counter with their own brand of populism or double down on being the party of responsible governance and institutional stability. The wild card in all this is whether Trump's tariff policies will actually deliver the economic benefits he's promised. If manufacturing jobs return and inflation subsides, his coalition could solidify. If prices rise without corresponding wage growth, we might see another dramatic realignment just as quickly as this one emerged. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Ranting Politics Headline Updates. We've covered some major stories that are shaping our world right now. China isn't pulling any punches with those trade war threats, warning countries not to cozy up to the U.S. at their expense, calling it seeking the skin from a tiger. Pretty vivid imagery there from Beijing. We also broke down Trump's high-stakes meeting with retail giants like Walmart and Home Depot as they navigate the new tariff landscape. Plus, those fascinating reports about Israel potentially planning limited strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, despite Trump preferring the diplomatic route. And don't forget that shocking Yale youth poll showing Gen Z voters leaning Republican by nearly 12 points. That's a seismic shift that could reshape American politics for years to come. Remember to follow us on X at RantingRP and catch our content on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. For more unfiltered news updates that cut through the partisan noise, visit us at rantingpolitics.com. This is JOC signing off, and thank you, our loyal listeners, for choosing Ranting Politics Headline Updates. We'll be back soon with the updates you need to navigate these interesting times. Remember, we don't align with a political party, we align with you, the American citizen. Until then, stay tuned, stay informed, and as always, stay free.